Okay, so to kick things off, this is the lesson 3 of our first story, which is incredible. I might take these off, which is really, really cool. That'll be our 4th lesson overall after our foundation lesson. And as this is called 7 stories, and as much as I'd love to take credit for it, this is originally based on the book 7 Stories by Anthony Bartlett, who is an incredible scholar. So what we've been doing is taking that and expanding on it and building on it and trying to kind of deliver it and work our way through it. The 7 stories are made up of these 3 lessons each, tracing a shift from the Old Testament all the way through to the New, always finishing with Jesus and something to do with the Gospels. And it's been incredible. So this will be the end of our very first story. And for those of you who haven't managed to catch up on the videos or didn't join in, a bit of a brief overview of where we're at and how we got here. The first lesson we looked at the shift in understanding that who are the Hebrews? Who are these people that God says, you are my people? And we traditionally have understood them to be a race. You know, that's how Genesis presents it. We've understood it to be a single lineage, nice, neat lineage, going from Abraham all the way down. But what we find out is that's really not the case. It's likely that the people that we understand to be the Hebrews, when God first shows up and reveals himself to them, they weren't necessarily a single racial ethnic identity. Rather, they were this motley crew, right? This group of dispossessed people. So people that from all over the land, but that were living within this corridor in the ancient Near East, where you're kind of in the middle of a whole bunch of war activity. You've got a whole bunch of empires. You've got Egypt, you've got the Assyrians and the Babylonians and all these different competing empires. So as this is going on in the land, people are displaced from their homes. People lose their source of any sustenance. That they find themselves without, and becoming mercenaries, becoming general dispossessed people. And so from a socioeconomic standpoint, they're sort of a very low socioeconomic group of people. The marginalized, the oppressed, the ones that are left in the margins and are forgotten. They were called the Hapiru, which is sort of where we get that word Hebrew from. And we went through all the evidence in the text as to why we think that. If you want to check that out, you can. But the big understanding, the big takeaway from that was that the God who is the true God reveals himself to this group of low socioeconomic, dispossessed, marginalized people. And that's not what gods did. Gods didn't operate that way. Gods were for the rich and powerful. That's gods were with your pharaohs and your emperors and your warlords and your kings and all that sort of stuff. That's who God was. And it was evidenced by they have money and wealth and power, therefore God is with them. The idea in that time of a God saying his people were this type of people, this crew, was incredible. So that's the first shift in understanding about this God. The second lesson, we looked at the Exodus story, which the Exodus, that's our starting point. We often think of Genesis as the starting point because it's sort of the first book. It's not. Genesis came later. They put it in the front. It tidies things up. It's its whole thing. It's really incredible. But really the starting point of the Bible, the starting point of the Hebrew people, the identity shaping moment where they were born was the Exodus. And so we had to look at, well, this God who identifies himself with the Hapiru, with the dispossessed, the very first time he acts in history, concretely, the very first time he shows up into our space and interacts, is this act of liberation out of Egypt, of this people, the slaves, the marginalized, the outcasts, the Hapiru, which is huge. Again, building on that idea that gods don't do that. The gods are supposed to be with Pharaoh. God is supposed to be with the powerful, and yet this God is acting on behalf of these slaves to liberate them out of that. So it's this incredibly beautiful picture of a God who liberates, a God who hears the cry for justice from his people. And that's amazing. That's a big step forward. That's what we call a semiotic shift. That's what Anthony Bartlett calls a semiotic shift, which is this idea, and you'll hear that term a bit. That's this idea of a shift in understanding, human understanding of who God is and what God is like. So it's something that moves our perception of God forward. And it's usually done through stories, through events, through signs, through something that happens for us to go, I cannot think of God the way I used to anymore. There's now a new perspective. We spoke about The Sixth Sense. At the end, you find out Bruce Willis was dead all along. You then rewatch the movie, it's the same movie, it's the same actors, it's the same script. Everything changes because your perspective has changed. You're seeing things differently and clearly. That's what a semiotic shift does. So that's the big semiotic shift from the last lesson, was this God of the Hapiru. Not only does he allocate this people as his people, he also acts and liberates them. Beautiful understanding, incredible shift forward, but it wasn't perfect. It was an incomplete revelation, because in the stories that we were going through, particularly in the Exodus, you've got some horrific stuff in there. You've got the plagues, God hardening Pharaoh's heart, the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, from Pharaoh all the way down to Egyptian slaves. You've got God like baiting Pharaoh like a mousetrap for him and all the chariots and everything to go into the Red Sea, specifically so he can destroy them. There is a lot of violence. It's great for the Hebrews telling that story around a campfire to their families, saying how great is our God, how strong and how powerful is our God. Not so great if you're an Egyptian. And for a God who hears the cry of the oppressed, well, Egyptian slaves were oppressed. They weren't out. They lost their firstborns as well. See, that's written in the text. So this idea of God as a warrior, this incredible violence, it's really concerning. It's hard to reconcile, particularly with what we know about Jesus. So it's a limited revelation. It's a huge step forward in our understanding of the character of God. But what it is it's boxed in this worldview that ancient people had, and the Hebrews did when they were writing these stories and compiling these stories and putting them into scripture. This worldview of what Bartlett calls generative violence. I didn't put the slides in, but they're in the notes. But generative violence is the view that violence isn't good or bad. It's just this necessary part of the recipe for things to get done. So for a God to be God, he has to act in violence. Like, how else do you prove that you're the biggest and most powerful God? You can't. You've got to be ultra violent. For us to be freed, we have to destroy our enemies. That's just how it works. If we want to take the land of Canaan or move into over here, we have to destroy any remnant of life that's in that space. It's not good or bad in their view. It's just how things get done. It's just the cost of doing business. It's how you create opportunity. That's why all of the myths from the Babylonians and from around all of those other areas, their creation myths all around the world, they're steeped in violence. Even the creation myth of Rome, Romulus and Remus, the Babylonian, the Enuma Elish. You've got Tiamat being ripped in half in this battle of the gods and blood spilling out, and that becomes the oceans and all this sort of stuff. Violence was the creative mechanism that the world required. And therefore, they're going to view God in that way. So there's this incredible revelation that they get about this God of the oppressed who hears the cry of injustice and acts on that as a liberating God. But it's stuck in this container of generative violence which means all of their stories around that event, all of their understanding of who God is tainted by this generative violence. And that's why we get these stories. And I won't redo that lesson. You can go listen to it if you haven't done it yet. But we go through all of that and how those stories maybe came to be. So this is where we're left. We're left with this group of people who have been liberated out of Egypt. And they're extremely happy for a little bit. You know, they grumble in the desert because it's pretty hard in there. They've been freed. They've been liberated. But they've spent 430 years in slavery. They don't know how to function as a society. They don't know how to really relate with each other. You think about, you know, that's just generations and generations of being abused, and your life has no worth, and you are told what to do and when to do it. And all of a sudden you're just cast out into the desert and expected to create a thriving society and community. It's just not going to work, which is where we get this idea of God helping them and giving them the law, giving them this framework that will help them form a society. Again, this framework, huge leap forward in a lot of ways. There's all stuff through there about how to treat the foreigner, how to treat those who are entering their lands, the aliens, not aliens from outer space, aliens from neighboring, you know, other outsiders, saying, don't forget you were foreigners once too. Yeah, you were liberated out. You experienced this. Don't repay that to other people. Love the foreigner. Give them, don't leave them to go without food and all this sort of stuff. So there's this incredible social justice component that's baked into the law that does all of this beautiful stuff. And that's great. But again, limited revelation. They're still in that world. Everything is still delivered and understood through this box of generative violence, the world that they lived in. You would have heard it said many times, you can take the people out of Egypt, but you can't take Egypt out of the people, or it's much harder to take Egypt out of the people. And it's so true. That's why when we see things like, in the 10 Commandments, do not murder, we go, that's pretty obvious, but it wasn't to them. In fact, that's a huge sigh of relief. That means that their life was protected, because it wasn't for the last 430 years. If an Egyptian wanted them dead, they were just killed, because there's just plenty of them. So all of a sudden now it's like, oh, your life has worth. And we don't do that to the others. So it's not the final part of the story, but it's a big step forward, right? Liberation was expressed. It was done through plagues and drowning armies and this incredible generative violence. They escaped empire, but they still thought like empire. And now this comes to what they thought of God, because that's all great. You're on the other side of the Red Sea and you're like, wow, this is amazing. It doesn't take long to start thinking, well, that's pretty scary. Like, I'm glad he's on our side, sort of thing. This understanding of God as a powerful, terrifying warrior is permeated through all of their stories from this time. And that's the tension that we get. So it's like God felt very powerful, but also terrifying. Yes, we were liberated, but it was done through this incredible violent force. There's a huge tension between the freedom that they were feeling of coming out of Egypt and the fear they felt of the God who liberated them. And this is their mindset. So they're wandering around for 3 months. And they're led to Mount Sinai. And the lesson today, we're going to be talking about this contrast between two mountains. Sorry, Tash just wants to join in. I'll let her in. We're talking about this contrast between two mountains.
Has she paid the subscription?
The subscription?
Yeah.
Mate, she's been paying it for about 12 years.
Okay, that's all right. Just trying to check.
Yeah, she's She's paid it and then some. Just wet the whistle. There are two mountains in Scripture. There's lots of mountains in Scripture. Mountains are a sacred space, but there are two in particular that are pivotal moments in the entire shape of the text and of the people. The first is Mount Sinai, which is where we're up to. They're wandering to the base of Mount Sinai to hear from God and to have the 10 Commandments being delivered through Moses to them. And the second is the Sermon on the Mount, which is not really a mountain. It's more like a grassy plain, which is why Luke calls it the Sermon on the Plain, and mostly just to confuse Bible scholars and theologians and cause arguments thousands of years later. But the idea is it's this beautiful green place. It's very, very different mountains. And there were huge shifts forward in both of those mountains. So we're going to be looking at that. We're going to discuss the tension between those two and see how we get there. But before we do that, we'll go back to that first mountain, Mount Sinai. Have any of you guys read the Exodus text, the story of when Moses first, when they arrive at Mount Sinai and Moses goes up and all of that? Have you read it recently? I'm sure you've all heard it and read it, but has anyone?
I've read it multiple times, but yeah, not for a long time.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, mate. I'm sure you've got it memorized.
Yeah, which verse do you want me to read off?
It's actually really terrifying. Obviously, I've read it and I've been dwelling on it in prepping for this. And it took me back when I first reread it. I was just like, this is really, really intense. Yeah, we have this romanticized idea of Charlton Heston and the movie and, you know, Moses coming down, and it's all very cool. And it's very godlike, you know, the smoke and the fire and all that sort of stuff. And it's a classic, you know, thing. You're going up a mountain because that's where God is. He's up the top. But I want to just read a couple of verses. Hang on. Let me just do this. Okay, so there's your two mountains. There's your Mount Sinai versus your Beatitudes. They're pretty different. All right. I'm going to read this one, and then I'm going to get Neil to read the next one. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow." This is Exodus 19, verses 10 to 13. So the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and prepare for the third day, because on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, 'Be careful not to go up the mountain or to touch the edge of it. Any who touch the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch them, but they shall be stoned or shot with arrows. Whether an animal or a human being, they shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain.'" And what terrifies me about this particular verse is anyone who's actually seen a mountain knows that there's no line around it that says this is where the mountain begins. Like, at what point does the elevation become a mountain? Like, they don't go straight up, like, you know. It's like, where is the perimeter of this thing? Because you've got to be pretty careful about that. It's a scary thing. All right, Neil, you read the next one. It's up on the screen. Exodus 19, 16 to 19.
I was going to do it out of the proper version, but I'll do. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now all of Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like a smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak and God would answer him in thunder.
Excellent. You passed. Thunder and lightning, thick cloud on the mountain, so you got people trembling. Yeah, this mountain's wrapped in smoke. Chuck some fire in there for the sake of it. The whole mountain shaking violently, and Moses goes up into that. So what's the picture of God that we're getting from this story before there's been any 10 commandments or law or anything like that? What's just the general vibe that we're getting?
I am scary.
Yep. Yep. I'm scary.
And dangerous.
I'm dangerous.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is that it's separate. Like it reminds me of the word holiness, like that separation. But this holiness is terrifying. It's not something that you'd want to approach. Holiness enforced by violence and death, and it's not just like you touch the mountain and you die. You touch the mountain and you got to get your people to kill you. It's pretty full on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the fact that you don't know when you're gonna, piss God off. You don't know when you're gonna mess up, because if it's not as distinct of crossing the boundaries, like, am I gonna upset it? Am I gonna die? Like,
Yeah.
That's that dread, I think.
Absolutely.
That fear.
Absolutely. And there's a huge sense of repeated boundary setting. Throughout a lot of the text, there's more than the two that we just read, but it's like set a boundary. And there's hierarchies. You can come a little bit up the way, but they can't come here. And then make sure that there is this huge sense of distance. This picture of a God who is clearly their God. At this point, that's not up for debate. He has liberated them. He has appeared to them. He said, "You are my people." He's like, "I'm your God," but you just you're there, and I'm here. There is a huge distance, a gulf, and I think for them, they're probably quite happy with that. They've seen what he can do. They've seen how powerful and scary and dangerous this God can be. The easiest thing is to just keep your distance in a way. Do what you're told, keep your distance. You don't really. Does that sound appealing to go up that mountain? I don't think Moses would have wanted to go up that mountain. That's not an inviting thing. I don't think there were a bunch of Israelites going, "Oh man, I was really hoping to get up there." They're like, no, that's cool. We'll give it an extra 100 meters back anyway, just because, we're good back here. This is the idea of God that they had. This is the understanding, and this is the birth of. It's in this, I guess, environment, this framework that the law is delivered. This understanding their relationship with God, their conception of God, very much shaped the law, very much shaped everything that came out of that moment. It's what the Torah, the law, emerges in this climate of dread, which is why when we see it, it's prohibitive, right? It's proscriptive. It's all "you shall not." It's kind of like this is a fragile community that's held together by a fear of collapse, and the law is the minimum requirement to not descend into chaos. It's kind of like we're just going to tell you some stuff like don't kill each other, and then we'll make sure that you do that. And in this context of fear, in this context of that sort of relationship, this distance with God, you're absolutely terrified to mess that up. Like you're going to keep those laws, right? This is a society framework that is really built on keeping them from total annihilation, right? From wiping each other out. It's just to kind of get them through. Yes, there's some beautiful advancements in it. Yes, there's some incredibly progressive social justice things in there, much more progressive than had ever been seen in the ancient world at that time. But it's still, again, built in this box, in this container of fear and of retribution. So if we look here, so we've got Mount Sinai here. It's prohibitive and it's retributive. So it's law and punishment. It's predicated, the law is completely built on the fact that if you do not do this, you will be punished. There are severe consequences. And we see some of those consequences. What's a really famous, there's too many, I won't throw it out to you. An eye for an eye, right? Eye for an eye is probably one of the most well-known things from that. We go, that's pretty barbaric, right? Like we're kind of progressed a bit beyond that understanding. But at that time, not everyone though, a lot of people think that's how it should be done, and it is still done that way in a lot of places. But at the time, that was an incredibly progressive law. It was this idea that, yes, there is retribution. If someone does something to you, if someone kills your ox, you can go kill their ox. Which we go, that's a bit rough. Like, you don't have to go do that. It's not going to make anything better. But what used to happen prior to that was if someone killed your ox, you kill their family. And then or you kill their brother, and then they come and they kill the rest of your family. And then there's this blood feud, and it goes on and on and on. This is like, goes back to, Cain in Genesis, where it's just like, 70 times 7, he will seek revenge and retribution. So it was this thing that it would descend into a mimetic chaos of a cycle of violence that would just evolve into anything. So what that idea, the whole eye for an eye thing was designed to do, was to basically just say, let's stop it. Let's design a mechanism that's going to actually cap this so that there is no cycle of violence. It's pretty brutal, it's retributive, but it was designed to stop this descend into a violent cycle. It was actually restraint. There was a limit on vengeance. It was measured violence to contain unmeasured violence. But what's the problem? It's still violence answering violence. It's still retribution. That's the heart of the whole system. It makes sense at the time, but it wasn't the final thing. It was a limited revelation. It was a step forward. It wasn't the final step. So if we look at this, if we look at this idea, right, we got here. Actually, let's have a look at these 10 commandments. So these are obviously there's a lot of law, there was a lot of stuff that was delivered. The 10 commandments is one that we're going to look at. And we're not going to go into a great detail with this, but we can see them. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make idols. Oh, and sorry, whilst I'm on here, this, you shall have no other gods. We spoke about this last lesson. It's not a typo. It is you shall have no other gods, because they weren't monotheistic at this stage, which means understanding that there is just one God. They were what is known as monolatrous, which means their understanding was there is a whole bunch of gods, but ours is the best one. Ours is the strongest one. We see that in the Exodus story, where it's talking about God saying, I'm delivering this violence as an attack against the Egyptian gods. And again, in the Ten Commandments, you shall have no other gods above it. He's not talking about social media or about things that you might like. They're talking gods, like literally don't adopt, Malak as well as me. Just have me. So it's an interesting thing for us to realize. You should not make idols. You should not take the Lord's name in vain, which I'm sure you guys all know has nothing to do with stubbing your toe and saying Jesus, and has everything to do with not acting in a manner that's clearly contrary to who God is and his character, and then badging it Jesus or God, which we're seeing a lot at the moment. You shall observe the Sabbath. You shall honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet, which covet is a weird word. It is rivalry that leads to violence, right? Which is Gerard. That is very clearly mimetic. Yeah, this is a desire that leads to competition and rivalry, which inevitably leads to violence and descends into chaos. So the Ten Commandments is quite progressive in saying, just don't covet. Let's just stop it at that point, which is really, really cool. So going back, no, let's stay there for a minute. These 10 commandments, you can see they're actually sort of separated. So between, I think it's 1 and 4, the top 4, you'll notice they're like personal actions. They're kind of actions for the people, like in their heart towards God, right? Don't have any other gods, don't make idols, don't take the Lord's name in vain, and observe the Sabbath. They're individual commandments. And yet these final 6, what's the difference? Can anyone pick the difference between the first 4 and the last 6?
Well, you need another person to break it, I guess, or keep it.
Yeah. They're relational. So they're commandments that deal with how do you interact with others? How do you, how are you in relationship with people? So they're 2 clear distinctions, and it's important for us to, you'll see why when we get to it, but it's this second section, this relational section, that Jesus actually addresses when it comes to the Sermon on the Mount. And so, before we move on to that Sermon on the Mount, this idea, does anyone have any comments or thoughts or questions around this? And we'll jump back and forth a bit, but around this whole idea of the God of Mount Sinai, the relationship with God, the perception of God that formed the environment that the law and the 10 Commandments and everything was birthed in. Yeah. Good job. Where are we? So, if we fast forward then to Jesus, right? And that's such a good picture. This is obviously where Jesus is hanging out. It was actually right here. That's what they reckon. That's the exact spot. And they would all kind of hang out here. There's probably lots of them over here. So yeah, that's a stark contrast. And so what we see with the Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew 5 and also in Luke, is the idea that Jesus is walking up and he stops and the disciples start asking him some questions. And so he literally stands up and they all kind of take a seat around him on this thing and everyone gathers and they're all kind of sitting around him as he's delivering this teaching. So straight away, what are your thoughts? What's the contrast? And here's a slide that will help you exactly with your thoughts. We've got Mount Sinai. God speaks to Moses in thunder and fire. And
it's gone from talking through an intermediary to speaking directly.
Yeah. Where's the distance?
Yeah. That's been shut down. Not about prohibition. Let's talk about just attitudes more. Yeah, the nearness in relation to God rather than fear and distance. Yeah, all those things we talked about.
That's exactly right. There's so many more. These are just some of the basic ones. Even the language. So Mount Sinai, the law is given through prohibitions. You shall not, you shall not, you shall not. You better not. You absolutely bloody better not. You shall not. So it's like, don't do this, don't do this. If someone does this, you can do this, but don't do this. So that same kind of attitude, that same idea of don't come up the mountain, don't step a foot over or else you're going to be killed. It flows through. It is like, it's a barrier. You know, the law is a barrier. It's a step forward, but it's designed for them to survive in their situation but not really thrive, if that makes sense. It was never the final picture. But in the Mount Beatitudes, we've got, it's not prohibitions, it's blessing announced through the Beatitudes. And we'll go through them. Blessed are, blessed are. That's not prohibitive or prescriptive. That's generating something. That's like an open invitation. You've got nearness and relationship with God. This is a God who sits down on the grass and has people sitting around him at his feet whilst he intimately talks to them, tells them a story, teaches them like a family, which could not be further from a God hiding up in fire, lightning, and smoke. Yeah? And from retributive justice to transformative love. So this is a total shift forward. This is a huge semiotic shift, right? This idea of our understanding of God. This is what God is like. Accessible, intimate, blessing, not threats. From you shall not to blessed are. It has transformed from being about avoiding death to becoming about a fullness of life, which is what blessed means. So we'll go through that in a second. But when it says blessed are, that's not your Creflo Dollar, send me $500 and you'll be blessed financially. That's got nothing to do with it. The word blessed, what it actually meant was, it was like your life is full. It was like a real present anchoring of like a fullness of life. So like in this state, or if you do this, or in these conditions, there is an absolute fullness of life presently in that moment. Not God will bless you, right? It is very much anchored in the moment, and it is that fullness, right?
Okay, so I guess in saying what you said just then about it being not like some deferred thing, it it it, it means it's not like a transactional thing. You do this and I'll change it for that. This is
Yes,
the way to live the full life. It's not a quid pro. It's a
correct.
blessed are the meek. So being a meek person enables you to inhabit the blessed life. Yeah, that's brilliant,
Absolutely.
mate.
Absolutely. So, and I always read it as blessed. Like if you do this, you'll be blessed. And how are you blessed? God blesses you. I don't know. Parking spots, promotions, happy life, happy wife, happy friend, like whatever blessing looks like to you or your congregation, right? But that's not the sense of this at all. And it doesn't even really work that way because it's like, well, some of these things that they're talking about are like conditions. It's like, how do you even get to that to be blessed? It's not even something that you're doing. So it's actually God, Jesus is saying something different. He's actually saying, you want to see what fullness of life is. Do you want to see what total, what a state of being that is anchored in the present and fully blessed in the sense that your life is full. It is whole, like a shalom, like there is a wholeness. This is what it looks like. Because clearly, and that's what God is. God is blessed. God is the fullness of life. God is God is wholeness, is shalom, is peace. It's like this is where God is. This is what we see. So so it's important that we understand what then Jesus is talking about, because it's not at all clear. There's a lot of confusion with this. Before we move on to that, I want to just run through some of these. These are some keywords that you'll hear me say. If I say Decalogue, that's the 10 Commandments. That's just the fancy word for it.
That's word salad. You're just doing word salad, brother.
That's right. Yeah. It helps me, makes me feel smart, to say things like Decalogue, right?
It's working.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Antithesis. This is a section of the Sermon on the Mount. I've got another slide that will show you all the different sections. Antithesis and Beatitudes are the two main ones we're going to be looking at. The antithesis is the passage in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus contrasts previous biblical teachings with his new teaching. It's the best bit. It's the coolest bit. You have heard it said, but I say to you. So when we talk about Scripture and we're on this journey to understand what it actually is, and saying that actually we can look at some stuff in the Old Testament, we can look at some stuff that is in Scripture, that is inspired and is beautiful and teaching and all that sort of stuff, and go, oh, that's not actually what God is like, because we have a greater understanding. We can see it through the lens of Jesus and sort of see they might have thought God was like that, but we know that he's not. So we reinterpret it. That's not something that we are just starting to do now. Jesus did it here. You've heard it said, but I say to you. This was your previous understanding, but I'm going to show you what it actually means. It's huge. The Beatitudes, the passage in the Sermon on the Mount consisting of wisdom sayings, beginning with blessed are you. Retributive, you guys, you're all my friends. You hear me say that probably every single day. Tash makes fun of me all the time. And I do say it way too much. But the ethic that justice is achieved by reciprocal compensating violence against the perpetrator. Again, I always use it in that negative sense, but that's what the entire law was built on. And it worked. And it was a step forward from where they were at. Proscriptive, not prescriptive, proscriptive, a command imposing a restraint or prohibition, right? The 10 Commandments are proscriptive. They are all prohibitions. Most of the law is proscriptive. It's imposing a restraint. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, right? And consequential. This is the ethic of positive or negative consequences that flow naturally or mimetically from non-violent or violent actions. Therefore, this is important, thus bringing their own judgment, right? Jesus talks about this a lot. Act in this way, this will happen. God's not doing it to you, you're doing it to you because you've acted in this way. Yeah? Don't forgive your brother, or you don't release someone's debt and you hold it over them. Well, don't be surprised if the same thing happens to you. It's consequential. God's not doing it to you. This is what happens, right? So there's some key concepts. So let's break down. So the actual Sermon on the Mount, it's huge. We don't realize it. We tend to think it's just like the Beatitudes, the blessed are, but it's massive. It goes through chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7 of Matthew. You got the Beatitudes, verse 1 to 12. Then you've got this tiny little bit, salt and light, where he talks about, the disciples, what it means to follow Jesus. You'll be salt and light to the world. Then that goes into then the antithesis. You have heard it said, but I say to you. Right? These are the two sections, and a little bit here, that we're going to be mostly talking about, which is why I didn't put any detail in here, because there's too much and the slide wouldn't fit, and we're not really going to be talking about it. But it goes on for another 2 chapters. There's teachings, there's parables, it talks about all sorts of different things. It's a big sermon. It was huge. And in our Bibles, it's all nice and neatly broken up into these sections. And some of them even will have like a heading above that section, right? In the Greek, that didn't exist. It was just one big, huge, unbroken sermon. There was no sections, right? It was just it. It was to be taken as a whole, right? So that's important. So, the Beatitudes. Rich, do you want to read them for those of us who are audio only?
All right. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. And it gets too fuzzy for me for the last one.
Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All right, Neil, how many lines are there, or how many little text sections are there that I've broken down? Can you see? 10. What's that remind you of?
Deca.
Decalogue.
It's not an accident that there are 10 Beatitudes. And yes, that last one that's doubled, the rejoice and be glad, is part of this section. So it's not a blessed are, but it is absolutely part of it. It is a distinct separate line. It's not an accident that Jesus does 10 Beatitudes. This is a direct conversation with the 10 Commandments. And let me tell you, the people he was speaking to, it would not have been lost on them that you had this guy who is doing the same sort of thing on a mount, right, a hill, delivering these things, and there's 10 of them. It's a clear link and commentary on the 10 Commandments, which is huge, and we'll talk about that. So again, similar to how the 10 Commandments, there was broken up into 2 kind of sections. Does anyone want to have a guess at, can you pick what are the 2 groups? There's 2 kind of different chunks again with this. I need that music, the thinking music from the game shows. Dun, 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 dun. All right, I'll bow you all out.
Sorry, I was going to say, is the first six the invert? Is it like inverted? First six are related personally, and then the last four are sort of communal?
Very, very close. Very close. It's the last five. I guess, yeah, you're not including the last line. So, yeah, so that last four from merciful onwards, they're communal, they're relational. And then the first bunch, they're conditions. So you've got these, the poor, those in mourning, the meek, those who are hungry or thirsty for justice. They're conditions of vulnerability. And then we've got relational actions. The merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those that are persecuted for righteousness. They're relational actions. So if we see, we've got public states, the poor, the grieving, the meek, the hungry. And then we've got active relationships, the merciful, the pure in heart, peacemakers, the persecuted. I've put a note here on the meek. It's a weird word. The way to understand that is it's effectively those who do not offer violence. In fact, in the Greek, it's a much richer word. It goes so much deeper, and it really has this sense of actually someone who has power, who has the capacity and chooses to not give into it, who chooses restraint and to not offer violence. That's an act of meekness, right? So this is bizarre that Jesus is calling this stuff blessed, right? What are the obvious questions around this?
Well, blessed are the poor. It seems counterintuitive. How is a full life attached to poverty and grieving and mourning and hunger and thirst? Seems like the opposite.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very blessed.
And as you're saying, like in the previous rounds, like, yeah, if you were the king or the whoever, that was a sign of being blessed because you're rich and powerful. Whereas it inverts it, puts it on its head and says, okay, if you're poor.
Absolutely. It's 100%. It's the opposite.
Yeah, and that goes with the meek, like as opposed to being powerful. It's counter to, what they used to. A powerful God,
Yeah.
You're blessed if you're meek.
100%.
Yeah, I'm an all-powerful God, and I could call down legions of angels, but I choose not to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like Luke was saying, in their understanding around the time of the law is God had to be violent, otherwise, it's like that's not God. Gods, we know what gods are. They're the violent, strong ones. So it's not just like what it's not just it happens to be what our God is like. It's like it's the qualifier, violent expression and power. Whereas, as you said, Jesus himself said, I could call this down, but I'm not. The nature of deity itself has been completely inverted, as well as I guess, our relationship to them.
Absolutely.
A big theological question then. on that same thing, on the one hand, we've got Chuck Norris. What do we have on the other hand then?
It's a really good
Chuck E.
point.
Cheese.
Yeah. Well, there's that question of God's power. What does a powerful God look like if it's not that?
Yeah.
What does power even mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, they're all extremely really good points. I mean, if blessed means you're filled with life, this is deeply paradoxical because it's going along with poverty and powerlessness. You know, there's nothing about this that screams this is what blessed should be at all. Have you noticed there's something that's in common with all of them as well? They're all non-competitive. That all of the conditions relate to a state of being that's non-violent, that's non-competitive, and like Neil said, it fundamentally challenges the whole world's value systems, especially the Roman value systems. This is not what blessed should look like. This is not what a fullness of life should look like, and this is not what God should look like. It's this is not just about a material condition, but it's also an inner state of non-possession. It's a life that's free from the envy or resentment. That often accompanies being in these conditions. And we're talking about the persecuted. It's especially for the early Christian community who are extremely persecuted. It underlines that enduring persecution without retaliation is not a sign of defeat, but it's actually a source of joy and strength within the kingdom of God. So Jesus, he's not announcing a law. He's announcing a life blessing, an entirely new relationship with the violence of existence is what he's proclaiming. One of love, of trust, letting go, forgiveness. The purpose of the law is fulfilled in the voluntary, non-violent embrace of these paradoxical conditions, which actually sets the stage for them to directly reinterpret the commandments themselves. That's why he's contrasting it. This is a clear step forward. I think what else is there on that? So there's non-violence as a thread of all eight. So when it says the meek shall inherit the earth, it's living a life of non-violence, of choosing to not retaliate and therefore not enter into the cycle of violence that perpetuates. That is what will win the day in the end. That is what will prevail. But it shouldn't work. It's not how the world has ever worked. And yet that's what Jesus is saying. So every beatitude steps outside rivalry and retaliation. So when we compare it back to the Ten Commandments and the law contained violence externally by being prescriptive, by putting barriers around it. But Jesus is not putting any barriers around. It's a very, very different Ten Commandments. He's not putting barriers. He's not containing the violence externally. He's transforming it internally. He's taking it from rule keeping to character formation. That's what Jesus is about. He's not trying to he's not interested in being prescriptive. He's interested in transformation. Saying these are the things, if you understand this, if you really get this concept, this is what will transform not only you, but the whole world. Which is pretty cool. Now, any other questions on the Beatitudes? All right, moving on to the antithesis that section. This is the coolest bit. Oh, this is very, very cool. Neil, if you've got your Bible there, I don't think I've got any scriptures on here up, so you might need to read some for some extra context. But we'll see how we go. So if I just switch back over to this. The antithesis. Okay.
Antithesis? Antifa?
Antifa. So in the Beatitudes, there's 10 of them.
Yep.
It's a reference to obviously the 10 commandments. That's not lost on his audience or on us today. But in the antithesis, he takes it one step further. The Beatitudes don't correspond one-to-one with the 10 commandments, right? They're just a whole new thing. But he does approach and tackle the actual 10 commandments in this section. First one he tackles, well, actually, these are the ones he does. He tackles, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, and you shall not covet. And what were those ones? Do you guys remember?
That's the relational.
Relational. So, you shall not murder. Jesus goes, do not even be angry. Paraphrase, obviously. Then, yeah, well, let's just tackle that one first. Don't even be angry. Actually, do you want to, how are we going for time? 15 minutes.
Can read it, can not read it. I can read every second word. Speed it up.
Yeah, go on. Read just that bit quickly. Matthew 5:21-26.
Ye have heard it said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause, shall be in danger of the judgment, and whoever shall say to his brother, Racha, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar and remember that thy brother Luke hath aught against thee, leave thy gift before the altar and go thy way, first to be reconciled to the brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly whilst thou art on the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the office, and thou shalt be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out hence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing.
Awesome. Do you have like the actual original 1618, the King James version? That's impressive.
Yeah.
So
it's harder to read than I thought.
It is harder to read. But we get the idea of that. It's saying don't even be angry. So it's addressing the root of the violence by transforming the anger that leads to murder.
Yep.
It's not about dealing with the murder. It's not about dealing with the act. It's about understanding what causes that act. And if you notice when he's talking about if you're on the way to the altar and you've got this stuff and you know that there's something between you and your brother, and he's like, don't worry about that, just go over there. Because Jesus is saying we're moving past this idea of a ritual to appease a God who is angry and to keep in the good graces of God. He's saying, no. It's relationship over ritual. Make peace with your brother before you go mucking around with, putting something on the altar. This is this is not about making it harder. People often think that the Sermon on the Mount is about making the law even more unattainable. And they say the whole point of it is that it's impossible to actually do. So therefore, that's how we know God is so good and we just do our best. So that's crazy. That's not the whole point of it. It is absolutely able to do. We just need to read it the right way. He's saying, don't worry about you shall not murder. Bring it all the way back to don't be angry, because it's in our anger that's where rivalry, competition, violence, inevitably that's where it begins. So we want to be transformed internally. You shall not commit adultery. And Jesus says, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, and he then talks about do not lust or divorce. This has been misunderstood in huge ways and misused in huge ways, right? Jesus is talking about lust, is talking about, this is not a purity, what are they called? What's that? The purity culture. This is not the poster child for that. He's saying that, again, we're getting it back to the heart. It's with lust, you're treating someone, there's an objectification. There is a unhealthy desire in that inevitably will lead, again, to a adultery or to something that is going to damage and break a relationship. Okay, so he's saying if we see people made in the image of God and we have that dignity and respect, then we're actually not going to let that into kind of to drive us to that point, right? Again, it's non-rivalry. It goes beyond the act to the internal desire. Yeah, and the divorce thing, which has really been used in lots of bad ways to force women to stay married to men who really don't deserve to be married to them. The reason he's talking about divorce is because divorce was a huge risk for women. Men could divorce their women for anything. You could, depending on the rabbi they listened to, you could, if you burnt the toast, you could divorce your wife. What then happens is, in 99% of the time, that woman is then left destitute. She's left with nothing. And the man goes on and he's got all the power and all the status and everything. She's left with nothing. She has zero security in that world if her husband can just divorce her and leave her for over anything. So Jesus is actually saying, you know what? We need to value this relationship. You cannot just divorce for any reason. And that is actually designed to protect the women. It's designed as a protective mechanism for the most vulnerable, which was usually the woman. You shall not steal. And he says, do not even resist the evildoer. Give your cloak as well. This is the section where he goes and he's talking about turning the other cheek. If someone demands your tunic, give them your cloak as well, all of this sort of stuff. This is about, again, it's overcoming that cycle of mimetic revenge or retaliation, right, with radical non-violent generosity. So this is not just about stealing. This is actually about, rather than stopping people from stealing out of greed, this is saying reverse that and have such an incredible generosity. And there's also this idea of not resisting the evildoer. This is not a pathetic, let people walk all over you sort of thing. These were acts of non-violent resistance. Yeah. So to turn the other cheek, if you were slapped, it was a backhand, right? So the Roman soldiers would slap you and it'd be across the top, using the back of their hand. If you turn your other cheek for them to do it again, well, with the way they're positioned, their hand is like this. They then have to come back this way, but that means they're treating you as an equal, right? It's only the backhand is for someone lower than themselves, but if it's an open fist or an open hand, that's reserved for the equal. Again, it's saying in a non-violent, resistive way that I'm your equal. We are the same. You can't treat me like that. You haven't broken my spirit. And to give your cloak as well, they only had one cloak. So if someone has asked to take your tunic, there was actually rules around not demanding someone's cloak, because often that would be the only protection they had when they would go to sleep at night. So by giving them that cloak, they would be naked. And again, it would highlight the injustice of what they've been asked to do. It is a way of resisting and standing against that particular injustice. So these are non-violent, non-retaliatory, non-violent resistance, and generosity. You shall not bear false witness. Do not swear at all. This was always a weird one to me, like just saying, like, you let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. Like, why? What's the difference here with, you don't swear on anything? Well, because swearing on something actually built into it is this idea of a God of violence, right? Because if I swear to God, what am I saying? If I'm lying to you, God can strike me down. It's saying that I'm swearing to you, and just so you can see that this is my way of convincing you that I'm telling the truth, that if I'm not, God will kill me, right? There will be a violent act. There is violence built into the swearing. He's saying, don't worry about that. Just let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. Just do that. Any kind of swearing invokes violence on oneself or another. It's a coercive power play that Jesus replaces with simple, truthful integrity. And the last one, you shall not covet. Love your enemy. Pray for those who harm you. Now, the you shall not covet is the 10th commandment, and is like the most important commandment of them all. The 10th one is often the most significant. That's why the 10th plague of the killing the firstborn was the one that finally got it all to, like, the whatever sits at number 10 is really, really important. You shall not covet, especially if you ask Gerard, that desire is what causes all of these issues, that rivalrous desire that leads to violence. The you shall not covet is like a catch-all. It stops that in its tracks, which is why when Jesus says, love your enemy and pray for those who harm you, that is his most important point as well. Love your enemy. It's like all of this leads down to love your enemy. That's the pinnacle of all of these steps forward. It culminates in that. That's kind of like you're a black belt. You've done it. Like, that's, if you can truly do this, this is what it means, right? That's Jesus on the cross loving the Romans and realizing that they're not his enemy. It's full on. Love breaks the cycle of desire and violence by actively loving the object of one's rivalry. Another thing, where are we going? So, okay, we're running low on time. I want to mention that the way Jesus has gone about all this, he's specifically said, you have heard it said, but I say to you. I cannot emphasize enough the gravity of that sentence, because rabbis did not do that. This is how a rabbi would teach. The scripture states this, or according to Rabbi Hillel, like they'll reference another rabbi, or it will be a commentary on something. It's always positioned as, here are my thoughts on something, or I'm teaching you what other rabbis or other people have said. Like, there is always that's how rabbis would teach. They had an authority to say this is what it might mean and this is what people think about it. But they weren't in the story. They weren't Moses until Jesus. Jesus comes along and says, you've heard it said, but I say to you, and then changes it completely. This is not commentary. This is not opinion. He is clearly and intentionally putting himself in the position and speaking for God. And then that, with the imagery of being on the mount, of kind of mirroring the 10 commandments and then changing them. And what he's effectively saying is, the law isn't bad. It wasn't like, hey, you guys, you got it wrong, but I'm here to tell you this is the right thing. You thought it was A, but it's actually B. He's saying this was the intent, this was the idea, this was the heart behind these laws all along. It was never just about not murdering. This is the thing. That's why he says, I did not come here to abolish the law, but I came here to fulfill the law. Right? Which some people hear that and go, oh, so he hasn't abolished the law, so we better not wear mixed cotton, and we got to. It's like, no. He's saying that no matter what that story is, no matter what they thought about God, no matter the limited revelation or the box that this original law was put in, the intent of it from God was always this. It was always going to end on this mount. It was always going to end with this. This is what God looks like. He's claiming that authority. And that is like, that's a huge thing. I'm just thinking yes. So what we end up with, we've gone from Sinai that was, remember, prescriptive or prohibitive and retributive, law and punishment. So what are we left with the Beatitudes? It's consequential and relational, which is blessing and relationship. The whole point, and even in the teachings that Jesus continues to go on throughout the rest of the sermon, at no point is he saying, if you do this, he talks about hell. That's the translation of Gehenna. And again, I'm sure you've all heard Shane Willard and other teachings on that. Gehenna was not hell. Gehenna is it was a place. It was the town flaming rubbish dump. He's saying if you do this, your life is going to end up there, right? Not an afterlife hell somewhere, but a very real present reality. This is what consequential is. Remember that definition. If you live in this way, the consequences, the natural and the mimetic consequences are going to be this. If you harbor unforgiveness to everyone, well, you're going to be alone. You're going to be angry and bitter. It's going to eat you from the inside. That is not God that's doing that to you. That is the natural consequence of you choosing to live that way. To let go of that is to be blessed, to be full of life. And it's not about retribution. This is not about a punishment code for if you break the law or if you step one foot out of this, then there is going to be a retribution. There is going to be consequences imposed on you and you're going to be punished. Instead, it's intensely relational. The whole focus is on relationship. Even that example I used before, where it's talking about relationship over ritual. It's all about how to, that's why the ones that he addresses are the relational 10 commandments. He doesn't bother with the first lot. The only one he misses is the honoring your mother and father, because he didn't need to address it. Because that whole commandment, you should honor your mother and father, that was in place to protect the elderly in that society, right? In the wilderness. The elderly, the mothers and fathers, a lot of the time they couldn't contribute. That they couldn't be productive members of society. And again, these are people relearning the inherent dignity and worth of human beings and human life. It's saying, honor your mother and your father, look after them, take care of them, make sure that they're okay. By this stage, by the time Jesus is delivering this, they were looked after. There was very much a very deep respect and things like that within that community. But that can then also become very insular. It can become like we look after our own and no one else, right? So that's why a lot of the stuff that Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount is talking about the kingdom of God and how it relates outside of just your family unit, outside of just that the kingdom of God is actually inclusive of people so much at such a wider scope than what they realized. You know, the family became from just the Hebrews or just that those engaged in Second Temple Judaism or whatnot, to all of a sudden it's everyone. It's like this huge scope. So that's why it doesn't actually address that in those, because it's addressed elsewhere and it wasn't an issue that they needed to really change. So I'm just thinking, I know we're just out of time. don't think I've missed anything. So I'll open up the floor in a second, but I will just throw out this question is, at the end of all of this, we can see the clear semiotic shift. There is a clear shift from a God that we are supposed to be terrified of, that tells us what we absolutely can't do, and a law that we're bound by and that we follow because we're terrified, to this view and understanding of a God who intimately sits with us on the grass and teaches us how to be filled with life, and teaches us that we don't need to worry about a God who is going to punish us, or a God who is going to be retributive to us if we step outside of these strict law rules that he's giving us. Instead, no, he's saying, instead I'm giving you a blueprint to what it looks like to be filled with life. And it is intensely relational. It is intensely linked with how you treat not just each other, but your neighbor and the external world around you. That's what God is concerned about. God doesn't need your ritual at the altar. He wants you to reconcile with your brother. He wants you to forgive, not because if you don't have forgiveness in your heart, or you've got unforgiveness in your heart, that you're going to rock up at some pearly gates and he's going to say, sorry, you didn't forgive your third grade teacher because he gave you a bad grade and you've just held on to it for 50 years. Like, no, it's got nothing to do with that. He's saying if you do that, it's going to eat away at you. If you live angry, you might not murder someone. Not every angry person is going to end up on a killing spree. But it's going to ruin your life and your relationships. And he completely inverts what it means to be powerful. This is a precursor to the cross, which it is ultimately displayed there. But he's saying, you guys need to reassess and flip upside down what you think it means to be blessed. Who you think God is for, what you think God is like, what it means to be powerful, what it means to, true power is not being stronger and inflicting that violence and dominating someone else, like the Romans and every other empire that had come before them. True power is non-violently resisting, turning the other cheek and not letting it kill you inside, and knowing that at the end of the day, that is actually what will win the day. When you break that cycle of violence that just perpetuates and perpetuates all the way through to the year 2025, you start to change the world. So I've gone 5 minutes over. I do apologize, but I'll throw it open to you. I understand if no one has any questions or doesn't want to talk because we have gone over, but yes. And sorry for talking so much. There was just a lot to cover, especially because it's the last lesson. You know, it's kind of has to like wrap it all up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It was great lesson, really good. One of the things I was thinking when you're speaking just then about non-violence, I've always struggled with this term non-violence because it feels like passivity.
yeah.
And it wasn't until I heard a recent comment by Aussie guy, Perth guy, called Jared McKenna.
Mm.
And he's like, you don't spell non-violence N-O-N dash violence, you spell it N-O-N violence. It's its own thing. It's not you got violence which is active and angry and attacking, and then you've got this other thing which is not that. Non-violence is its own thing which is active. And when you were talking about turning the other cheek, non-dash violence would be the idea you just sit there and take it, just turn the other cheek and let them beat you half to death. Whereas what you're saying is actually non-violent resistance in this matter was to stand up and let them backhand you, which was you worth nothing, and suddenly you positioned yourself actively like, if you want to strike me again, you have to actually deny that first act and now treat me as one of your own. And
Absolutely.
that's an active commentary. It's an active breaking down of the very thing that they're doing to you without retaliating in violence. Because if you're violent, violence can only establish an empire. That's how you do it. If we participate in violent retribution, we may win, but then we'll just be presiding over the next empire, and
Absolutely.
nothing will change except the name of the person in charge. And I thought you brought that so clear, and it's so incredible how Jesus puts himself into the story and says, "Hey, it's all changing. Not all changing, but it's coming to its fullness. This whole saga. It's just brilliant. Just loved this lesson, mate."
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah, it is. It's that creative resistance, and that idea of non-violence being. I think Jesus really makes it so that violence. You get this sense that violence is not just an external action. There are people that are incredibly violent that have never laid a hand on anyone, yet they're a ball of rage, or they're incredibly selfish and inconsiderate to the needs of others, or they have so there are ways of thinking that can actually perpetuate that view in the world. This non-violence. So if there can be a lens of generative violence, the belief that it is a necessary thing in the world for the world to proceed, which again, Christian nationalism has that belief. That was the Crusades. Look, if we have to slaughter some people to further the name of God, that's at the end of the day, is what we have to do, right? It is, or if we have to bulldoze our way in to make sure that we can hang the 10 Commandments in every room, and we've got to lie and do all this sort of stuff and kick people out and scapegoat people and all this sort of stuff in order to become a real bona fide Christian nation, then that's what we have to do. The ends justify the means. That is a view of generative violence. But we can also have the understanding that the reality is the world is built on, non-violence is also generative. It creates its own thing. Forgiveness can be the most impactful, powerful thing in the entire world. It can change entire family trees and generations, and the simple act of forgiveness, especially when it's radical and unexpected. So it shapes the world just as much as a violence one does, and that's what the cross really does. Love dissolves rivalry. The cycle of violence actually collapses in radical unconditional love. It just short circuits that whole system, which is why the cross is crazy. And I love this picture of this lesson, because it's like, in prepping for this for the last few weeks, I've just been immersed in it, and I'm always asking myself this question, like, what parts of my life am I living on Sinai? Because not all of my life is on, the Mount of Beatitudes. It's not. Where am I viewing God or acting as if God's like the one on Sinai? Well, there's huge parts. I think we're all living our lives a little bit on both mountains in some cases. But you don't know it, right? So when you get a picture of this, now all of a sudden that's that semiotic shift. We go, okay, I don't need to live on this mountain. I need to come over here. I need to realize this. I still see a lot of fear-based, rule-bound, retributive thought in the church, in theology. Because it's much neater and cleaner than a relational, consequential, transformative Sermon on the Mount. The 10 Commandments is way clearer than the Beatitudes, let's be honest. And I think because this whole story is on oppression to justice, this whole first story, and I think when we think about justice in the Sermon on the Mount, justice becomes relational harmony. and not divine payback. Justice is not plagues and drowning chariots. Justice is forgiving when the other person doesn't deserve to be forgiven. Turning the other cheek and loving your enemy. So Jesus redefines God's character. But I guess a good question for you guys is it unrealistic? Is it too idealistic, the Sermon on the Mount?
Ooh. Yeah, it feels like it when you sort of take it in today's culture, doesn't it? Yeah, every way. Carol?
I was just saying, like, the whole thing about being blessed, like you want to live a life that's full of joy, of peace, like Kung Fu Panda's inner peace is basically, yeah, it is like having that surrender to that poorness of spirit. It's not saying, oh, you seek poverty, but it's the relinquishing of that need to be right all the time, the need to win, the need to have power over someone else, but whereas it's about seeking something else, which is wholeness and love and grace, and that in that sort of posture is actually where you are blessed or blessed. And it's that state of wholeness, of learning the true nature of who we are in the image of Christ, right? That's the inherent beauty that and it's not too much, because I think that is what everyone seeks. But unfortunately, I'm misguided by what is presented as this is how you get it. It's true wealth, power, all this external forms. Whereas the whole thing about Jesus is relational, is about this inner work, it's the inner life, the pursuit of that. And I think it is achievable if you follow Jesus and you live like him, and you think like him, and you seek that sort of life. And I think many do. It's rare. Maybe you don't see it because they're not on Facebook or TikTok or Shorts. They're not publicizing it. Right. So you only see the extremes of the other hunt. For being blessed.
Jude's blessed.
Hashtags.
Yeah, you don't see that.
Yo.
Yeah.
This.
That's really good.
Yeah. I think, I want to answer, it's unrealistic, but only in a certain frame. It's unrealistic if the good life is the life that violence, wealth, all your influence, if that's the good life that you want, you have to be violent, because that's how you grab a hold of stuff. You have to do that. But it's not unrealistic if we can shift, and this is the bit that's really convicting to me, shift what the purpose of the good life is. To get the good life that's actually good, to me, it's like, well, Jesus said, you'd be blessed, happy, lucky, etc. if you're poor, because you will get the kingdom of God. A poor person's like, oh yes, because it's a natural fit, and because I'm going, that sounds unrealistic. It's probably because I've got a complete wrong conception of what the kingdom life really is like. Otherwise, I'd be like, natural fit. So that's one thing. There's one bit that just struck me as well. I'll quickly say it, about turning the other cheek. It's sort of like, you heard it said, I'm saying to you this principle, hey, look how it gets lived out. You thought it was about this being good with God was the most important, but hey, if you're on the way to do your ritual stuff and your relationships are broken, you better sort that out, because that's much more important. You're like, oh, great. And then he goes, oh, by the way, if some guy's going to take you to court and because you owe him money and this whole system is set up against you poor people. You're
Yep.
not going to get justice by going to the court. So he gives them like super practical advice. It's like, you better sort this out before you get to the court, because you settle out of court, you're going to be fine. If you get to that place, the judges are against you. You know, this is set up for the rich people. And you'll end up in jail till you pay every penny. Jesus is very practical. He's like, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic. So here's some practical advice while you are seeking to transform the world through this place. And it's just incredible to me. Um, every time I hear you speak, Luke, I feel like I'm less Christ-like than I thought I was. I thought I was so good before
Yeah.
this,
Oh,
but
mate.
it's so good. It's so good I'm hearing. I feel like I felt when I first encountered Jesus. Like,
Mm.
yeah,
Well,
this is it.
It's
And
amazing.
that's it. Yeah, that's the call. That's the way. This is the way.
Yeah. I feel that same way about
Uh,
myself every time I'm preparing for these lessons. So I just go, oh man. But you know what? But then also it's followed with just this undercurrent of um, knowing that God is so patient, and that, I guess if we look at this, if it is idealistic nonsense, well, if we're reading it as a stricter law, then yeah, absolutely, it's impossible. Because if that's the case, every time we get angry, someone cuts us off in traffic, then we've lost it. It's cactus. It cannot be read as just a stricter law, and that's just not what Jesus was about. It needs to be seen as transformational. So it's directional, not perfectionist. It is about continuing to move us in that right direction towards what God is like, right? Towards an inner transformation, right? So it's becoming, not performing. That's why it's
becoming
not.
like it.
It's not. That's why it's not the clear boundaries of the Ten Commandments, and instead they're more vague, because it's not about, did I avoid being angry today, and it's really more about, am I becoming a person of mercy, of peace, of love? Am I moving in that direction? Because that's where I will feel a fullness of life. So it's not a
like that.
checklist.
It,
It's not a checklist. It's a mirror of divine character. That's how we see it. That's where we see God. That's why Jesus finishes it with the most insane call to action ever. He goes, "Oh yeah, by the way, therefore be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Oh, okay. It's like, yeah. So even if you manage to tick them all off, then you finish off with, "Oh yeah, so just be perfect." But he's not talking about get it all right. It's not about that. He's saying um, that what perfection looks like is this character of God.
So is it like a state of being? Like, be perfect. It's like be who you're meant to be, like be that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perfect
Yeah.
in this sense, perfect just means whole, complete.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, and it's presented in a way like God's indiscriminate love. This new shift, this new understanding of God's character. This is who God is. That is perfection. So
Mm.
as we move towards an enemy embracing love, as we move towards uh, all of the ideals that are set here, we're moving closer and closer to God. So it's like a call to keep moving in that direction. And it's a clear picture that this is what perfection looks like. This is what wholeness is.
It's good.
Um, but yeah, it's really, really good.